Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. It's Jennifer Chan for the Commission, and with me is Patrick McGowan. Just as a housekeeping matter, we have Nicole Chavez for the Stolo Tribal Council and Chiam Indian Band to speak to you.
Yes, Mr. Commissioner. Nicole Chavez, I'm co-counsel for Stolo Tribal Council and Chiam Indian Band. We just wanted to flag an issue with the Commissioner. There is an outstanding objection of our standing group that also other groups had made submissions on regarding the scope of questions of the Area E gill netters and Fisheries Survival Coalition, and also regarding Mr. Eidsvik representing the participant group now that he's represented by council. Mr. Commissioner, we are not expecting a ruling on this today, but we wanted to flag the issue. Another issue that I just briefly wanted to point out, we've been provided with a list of documents that the same standing group, Area E and Fisheries Survival Coalition, might be relying on within the monitoring and enforcement hearings. I've spoken to Mr. Eidsvik. He indicates he's mainly going to rely on them, or he's going to rely on them for the enforcement hearings. My point being that the list was not received within the necessary timeline for these monitoring hearings. We received the list on Thursday with some 59 documents that are not listed in Ringtail. Many of them are voluminous, and it becomes an issue of fairness if he was to rely on them in these 2 days of hearings, especially. We would be possibly objecting to that. So I just wanted to flag these issues with the Commissioner. Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, I've spoken with Mr. Eidsvik, who advises that the documents he's provided are for the panel next week, not for the panels today or tomorrow. I've communicated that to Ms. Chavez, and if an issue arises with a document when it's put to the witness, my submission, that's the appropriate time to deal with it.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. We're at the beginning of 4 days of hearings on the topics of fisheries monitoring and enforcement, and this will be presented to you with the assistance of 3 panels. The first 2 panels, which will take 1 day each, will primarily focus on the topic of fisheries monitoring and catch reporting, and that's for the commercial and Aboriginal fisheries. You'll recall that during the recreational fishing hearings in March, you heard evidence on the Creel survey method of catch monitoring and reporting that's applied to that fishery. The third panel, which will take place over 2 days, will deal with the topic of fisheries enforcement. The Commission has prepared a policy and practice report entitled Fisheries Monitoring and Catch Reporting for Commercial and Aboriginal Fraser River Sockeye Salmon Fisheries, and that was distributed to all participants on March the 17th. If I could have that marked as the next PPR, please.
PPR number 12.
Thank you. And if we could have the witnesses sworn or affirmed.
Solemnly affirm that the evidence to be given by you to this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Yes, I do.
State your name, please.
Rob Houtman.
Lester Jantz.
Matthew Parslow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, today's panel is here to discuss the current methods that are applied to fisheries monitoring and catch reporting, again for the commercial and the Aboriginal fisheries. Let me start by introducing the panel to you. Dr. Houtman, and if we could have Dr. Houtman's CV brought on screen, please. That's tab 2 of the Commission's list of documents. Dr. Houtman, you're a catch monitoring biologist with DFO's Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo, is that right?
That's right.
And you've held that position since 2002.
Yes.
And as an example, you've led projects assembling official salmon catch estimates. And
Yes.
you've examined data quality control for salmon catch data in one of DFO's fisheries databases, the FOS system.
Correct.
And so today you can speak to fisheries monitoring and catch reporting for Fraser River sockeye salmon fisheries in the South Coast, and also commercial Fraser River sockeye salmon fisheries in the South Coast and the Lower Fraser, is that right?
Correct.
If I could have the CV for Dr. Houtman marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 837.
And on to Mr. Matthew Parslow, if I could have his CV brought up, please. That's the Commission's document set tab 4. Thank you. Mr. Parslow, you're a management biologist now. You're no longer an acting management biologist.
That's correct, yeah.
And you're at DFO's Annacis office, and that's for the Lower Fraser area, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Thank you. If you've held this position since July of 2010, and
Yes, and for a year and a half before that as well.
great, thank you.
Position.
And so as part of that position, you're responsible for the estimation of catch for the Lower Fraser First Nations FSC and economic opportunity fisheries.
That's correct.
And so you provide those estimates to the Fraser River panel and to other management processes?
Yeah.
Thank you. And so today you can speak to Fraser River, Lower Fraser River, fisheries monitoring and catch reporting for the Lower Fraser First Nations, FSC, and economic opportunity fisheries.
Yep, that's right.
Thank you. And if I could have Mr. Parslow's CV marked as the next exhibit.
Exhibit 838.
Thank you. And on to Mr. Jantz. And you're returning as a witness to us today. And if we could have your CV brought up. Thank you. Mr. Jantz, you're the Area Chief of Resource Management for BC Interior, is that right?
Yes, that's
And
correct.
So you're in the Kamloops office?
Yes,
And you have been as this position since 2006?
that's correct.
Thank you. And as part of that task, it looks like you have on the screen there quite a number of responsibilities. Some of those include managing the human and physical resources for the resource management sector in the BC Interior.
Yes,
And you manage delivery of AFS programs in the BC Interior.
yes, that's correct.
And wrapped all into that is that at the management level, you oversee the fisheries monitoring and catch reporting program in the BC Interior.
Yes.
Thank you. So today, you'd be comfortable speaking with us about the fisheries monitoring and catch reporting for the BC Interior First Nations fisheries, and that's both FSC and economic opportunity?
Yes.
Thank you. If I could have Mr. Jantz's CV marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 839.
So I'll begin my questions with questions directed to Dr. Hoopman on the commercial fishery. Now, Dr. Hoopman, you've had a chance to review the policy and practice report, or at least sections of it, that the Commission has produced, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And are you content with its description of how fisheries monitoring and catch reporting is performed with respect to the commercial Fraser River sockeye salmon fisheries, and specifically at paragraphs 117 through to 134?
Yes.
Thank you. If I could have the Commission's tab number 5 brought up, please. Dr. Hoopman, could you tell us what this document is? Do you recognize it?
Yeah, it's a summary of compliance of phone-in reporting. Phone-in reports are what commercial fishers are required to make soon after a day of fishing. In most license areas, the requirement is for 8 a.m. the next morning or 24 hours after the end of that fishing day. So this shows the fraction of the estimated vessel days. That is the product of vessels fishing, well, the sum total of vessels fishing on each day of openings. The fraction of those vessel days for which a phone-in catch report was received on time in the third column, reports on time, and in the fourth column, reports up to 24 hours late, and in the second column, the fraction reporting column, total. So even subsequent to 24 hours late.
Okay, and we'll return to this page about phone-in compliance, but if we could go to the third page, please. And this shows commercial salmon logbooks, and could you explain what this part of the table shows, please?
So all commercial license holders, all commercial fishers need to have a logbook and record in that logbook during fishing their catch and information on where they're fishing and hours fished, some number of sets, various things in their logbook. And they keep that for the season, and they use that to make their phone-in reports. But at the end of the season, after fishing opportunities are ended for that season, they're required to return it to the department or to their service provider. And the service provider processes those logbooks for a second sort of better copy of their catch reports to compare to their in-season phone-in reports in case there was errors in transmission or recording of their phone-in catch reports.
Thank
So this,
you.
sorry, this table shows the compliance with that requirement to return the logbooks.
Thank you. So as I'm looking at the chart, I see that for some of the areas, there's a significant, what looks like an improvement from the year 2004 to 2005. So we can choose an example. If we scroll down, actually, okay, so we see there the area D gillnet, and we see the 2004% returned as 63%, and in 2005 we see the returned as 92%. Could you tell us what's the explanation for that that increase in compliance?
There was so the 2004 books are returned in sort of the winter and spring of 2005. In 2005, we added a license condition, we added requirements that 2006 licenses would not be issued until their licenses were cleared. And part of that clearance, the main thing we were able to keep a renewal uncleared for is if their logbook wasn't returned. So that was a new requirement for 2006 license renewal, that the logbook had to be returned before the license would be renewed. So that led to a lot of fishers who, at that point, it was a fairly new requirement. So a lot of fishers scrambled at that time. It's gotten a lot better since that. Fishers know that requirement now. Logbook return rates have stayed high, and it's not so much last minute as it was in 06.
Now, for the phone-in compliance, it looks to me if we take some examples, for example, if we scroll down to the Area B Seine for 2010, for the west coast of Vancouver Island, we have here 82% as a fraction reporting. Is that how you read that chart there?
Yes.
Okay, if we scroll down a little bit more. Could you tell us if the same requirements in the license were applied to phone-in reports as the ones you just described for the return of logbooks?
No, licenses were not held up for lack of phone-ins.
Mm-hmm. And
still haven't been. Yeah.
Thank you. And so could you let us know, how has that affected the compliance rates for some of these fisheries? Perhaps if we scroll down a bit more to the Area E gillnet fishery phone-in compliance for 2010.
So I don't understand the question. How has what affected the compliance?
So you've told us that having the requirement that the logbooks be returned has made a difference with regards to the logbook compliance. Have you seen any similar improvements for phone-ins?
Not related to that. I think phone-in compliance has generally increased over the 10 years of the program.
Are you satisfied with the phone-in compliance right now as they stand?
Well, fishery managers really hope for 100% reporting. Statistically, you don't need 100%. If you have a good estimate of the effort that is fishing, then you can expand. You can treat the phone-in reports as a sample, assuming it's representative of the ones that didn't report, and expand it. So there's, statistically, I think these are very high, sample rates if you can treat it as a sample. Fishery managers would say we want them all, and partly that's because that's fairness to the fleet that they're all making the requirements.
Is there any effect on the certainty of your catch estimates that arises from this expansion process?
Yes, and expansions has some error around it, but with sample rates, in the 80s, that error is very low. The greater concern for error then is the quality of the estimate of the total effort.
And so these, of course, the logbooks, phone-in compliance, or the logbook and the phone-in compliance aren't the only things that are used for monitoring. Can you describe some of the other monitoring or reporting requirements that aren't shown in these tables?
Both reporting and monitoring?
Well, let's stick to reporting.
There's fish slips. Fishers or plants on their behalf are required to fill out sales slips or fish slips and submit them to the department. That's required for all commercial sales.
And let me
There's
ask you about
there's also on-water reporting to Charter Patrol, or if there's a fishery officer there or a fishery manager on the water, there's requirements in license conditions that they do have to provide responses to questions.
And could you tell me about the compliance rates for fish slips, which is one of the ones that you mentioned?
I don't have hard numbers on that, but there's a understanding that fish slip compliance has dropped over the last sort of 20 years, and so up till 95 they were the major basis for our catch estimates. But as fishers were finding alternative ways to sell fish, including direct to public sales, enforcement of compliance with fish slip generation and submission became difficult. So there's a concern that fish slip compliance has reduced over the last 20 years to where, and that was a major cause for the logbook program to be created about 10 years ago.
Thank you. Now, these compliance rates, do they speak to the accuracy of the reports that are provided to DFO?
Technically, compliance rates affect the sample, is the sample rate, how many reports I get, what fraction of the fisher's report, and that affects the precision technically. The accuracy would be influenced whether, if the reports are accurate reports of the catches on those reporting vessels. And also, again, how accurate is our estimate of the total population of boats to expand that reported catch to. So the compliance rate's this compliance rate doesn't, I would say, affect the accuracy. It affects the precision.
Thank you. If I could have this document marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 800.
And Dr. Hoopman's just continuing on that line as far as the accuracy of estimates. Is there any reason why a report that comes into you from a commercial fisher might not be accurate?
Yep. Fishers could sort of give the wrong information intentionally or unintentionally. It could be misread or misrecorded or misheard by the telephone operator if it's a phone-in, or misread by the people who enter the data from the logbooks. So that would be sort of unintentional. There could be intentional reasons, including underreporting the target species for strategic reasons, if they think that could influence their opening days. There's also more likely is underreporting of sensitive bycatch species, I would say.
And so what are the methods that are used to ensure that the catch reports that DFO obtains are accurate? How are they validated?
Around the region, often they're not validated at a very high level. So there's potentially observers on boats, but the rate of having observers on boats has gotten very small to where it's, and definitely small enough that it's not useful as an alternative, except as sort of a check on it's not available as an alternative data source, but it's available to say to the fleet, we know that we're getting under reports. But observer rates have gone very low. There's also dockside validation, of course, and that has increased over the last couple of years with Area B and Area H having required validation for their Fraser sockeye fisheries.
And does Area E also have dockside monitoring?
Yes, but it's a little different there. It's not a requirement for all vessels to be monitored, but we have a 35% target of monitored landings, which would provide a very adequate sample for developing a catch estimate based on that validated catch.
But if anyone wanted to avoid having their catch validated, and if there's no mandatory landing and it's, a 35% target, would it be difficult for a fisher to avoid having their catch validated?
In Area E?
Yes.
I do not think it would be difficult. We did not have we talked about assigning vessels at the beginning of the day when they called in their start fishing reports, assigning them randomly, saying this vessel has been chosen, must respond to a validator. And though that there's a lot of challenges with that because the fishers don't know where they're going to fish, so there might be a lot of travel time at the end of the day to report to a monitoring station, various difficulties. So we did not do that last year.
Are there any commercial Fraser River sockeye salmon fisheries that have limited monitoring? For example, where there might be days of fishing and there's no monitor out, or can you explain if that happens?
Yeah, so in the last year, Area D was in that category. There's days where I believe we don't fly to estimate the number of boats fishing, and to my knowledge, there's very limited validation of the catches that are reported. So our catch reports there are, our catch estimates for that fishery are based very strongly on reported catch.
Thank you. Mr. Len, if I could please have the Commission's documents at tab 25 brought up, please. Dr. Hoopman, this is a document that we received from DFO. Could you describe what this document indicates for us, please?
I'm not the best guy to ask about this one. Sorry. I wasn't involved in developing this table.
Okay, perhaps Mr. Jantz or Mr. Parso, could you assist?
Certainly, this table summarizes the expenditures that the department has put into catch monitoring in the different areas in southern BC. So it breaks it out. South Coast has Central Coast information as well, Lower Fraser, and the BC Interior information from 2000 up to 2010. And it breaks the information out further into actual salaries and wages of within the DFO program and within the federal funding. So this is separate from AFS, I believe, and also has our operating dollars associated with it. So that's the O&M category that you see on the column on the left. So that's the general expenditures that the department has put into monitoring fisheries since 2000.
Thank you for that explanation. If I could have this document marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 841.
If I could have the Commission's document at tab 26 brought up, please. Dr. Hoopman, are you familiar with this document? It shows that it's the amount paid directly by salmon commercial license holders to Archipelago Marine Research for logbook services?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. And so, could you please describe for me what this document tells us as far as the contribution of commercial fishers to the logbook program?
Yeah, it's the sum of the fees paid by individual fishers to Archipelago Marine Research, AMR, for annual logbook services. Logbook services include getting the paper logbook, having a call center that's 24/7 that the fishers can call their phone-in catch reports to, and also they're the people that the service includes that when the fisher returns their logbook to them, they will key punch the entire contents of the logbook, so that we have the logbook catch, we have the hard copy catch report to compare to the phone-in catch report.
Thank you, Dr. Hoopman. And aside from the logbooks, is there any intention for DFO to have commercial fishers pay for any other parts of the fisheries monitoring or catch reporting program?
I believe the direction has become a little bit fuzzier. About 5 years ago, roughly, we had fairly strong direction that costs should be moved more and more toward fishers in general. And over around 4 to 6 years ago, the fraction of the logbook program that was paid by commercial fishers went up a lot, justified by that. We had been covering a large fraction of the logbook service cost, and then we over a couple of years changed that to where fishers were covering basically 100% of it, or a large fraction anyways. I'm not sure if it's as clear now that we should continue along that route for other monitoring costs. Some of them are very difficult to imagine fishers paying for, like charter patrol, which is a monitoring cost.
So that direction is still a bit uncertain at this point.
I think it's become less certain than it was about 5 years ago. Clear statements that we should, and some conflicting statements since.
Thank you. And if I could have that document marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 842.
Up on the commercial fisheries monitoring and catch reporting section, could you tell us if you feel that fisheries monitoring and catch reporting for this fishery is accurate and reliable, or if not, if you have any recommendations that you'd like to share with us for improving it?
So this fishery is the Fraser sockeye fishery wherever Fraser sockeye are caught, not just in the river. And so my sense is, and I think the department's sense is that commercial catch estimates for sockeye catch in that fishery is quite a good estimate. In terms of things to do to improve it, one very practical thing that has been included in license conditions over the last few years, and to the point where last year it was included in all of the South Coast license areas, is start fishing reports. A requirement for fishers to say they're starting fishing on a particular day, and, along with end fishing reports saying they're ending fishing on a particular day. Those reports provide a very strong start of a paper trail that the fisher is on the water, is fishing. Then there's the ability for the department to confirm that they made a catch report for that day. It provides a very strong sort of incentive for the fisher to comply with the other catch reporting requirements. And it's a very practical thing and very enforceable if CMP can help enforce start fishing reports. It's a fairly new requirement, so compliance has not been great.
Now moving on to the First Nations communal, food, social, and ceremonial, and economic opportunity fisheries, I'll be directing my questions primarily to Mr. Jantz and Mr. Parslow. And so I'll start with you, Mr. Parslow. You've had an opportunity to review the PPR that the Commission has produced.
Yes, I have.
Thank you. And are you content with its description of how fisheries monitoring and catch reporting is performed with respect to First Nations, FSC, and economic opportunity Fraser River sockeye salmon fisheries in the lower Fraser area?
Yeah, I think it provides a good general overview of the fishery monitoring there. Yeah.
Thank you. And the same question to you, Mr. Jansen, with respect to the BC interior area?
Yes, similar to Matthew, it's a very good general description of the programs.
And so I'll go along similar lines with asking about compliance rates for you. Have you had any experiences with difficulty in obtaining catch reports from any of the groups that report to you?
On occasion, there have been circumstances where individual fishers may choose not to report their harvest, and in some instances there has been difficulties in getting some information from some terminal bands in the interior.
And with respect to the lower Fraser?
Yeah, similarly, excuse me. We have had some groups where individual fishers will not report, and we've had some First Nations which have either refused to report or have operated a monitoring program and provided the catch information at a later date. And that has typically been tied to funding provided for the monitoring program.
And when you say at a later date, what effect does that have on the ability to make harvest management decisions on that information?
With the group that decided not to provide their information until they were given funding, that group is covered off by a larger monitoring program, and so for the most part, the fishing activity that is occurring is accounted for under that monitoring program, and it just helps to refine our estimate.
So if there is an issue with non-reporting or late reporting groups, as you've described, how is that catch accounted for? You mentioned that sometimes it's taken into consideration for a larger program, but if that's not the case, how is it accounted for?
There's been a couple of situations. One where we haven't actually produced an estimate for that fishery. There's a strained relationship between the group and DFO, and so there was an interest from the department to operate a monitoring program on that fishery, and data was not provided. So, but in situations where we have a better relationship with the First Nation, we can operate our monitoring program and produce an estimate for that fishery. So,
are there any kinds of repercussions to not reporting?
For the First Nations, the group that did not report, for the entire season, we didn't provide an AFS agreement, so there was no funding provided to the group. And that's the only repercussion that I've seen so far.
And do you have anything to add to that, Mr. Jantz?
And similarly, for groups that have not provided information, and again in the interior, it's been a very limited number. One band in particular that I can think of that has had a history of not reporting again until late in the season, and in 1 year in particular, not reporting at all. But we've had a number of meetings with them to try to improve their data. It's been a lot of political reasons why they have not reported on a timely basis. But in general, they're in years where they have not reported, we've taken actions to not pay for the program and things of that nature. So we do attempt to address those sorts of circumstances as they occur.
Thank you. And moving on to the accuracy of catch reports that you receive, can you think of any reason why a report that you receive might be inaccurate?
Similar to the commercial fisheries, you're relying quite often on fisher reporting, and the information is often collected by the First Nation as a whole. So in general, there are sometimes inadvertent misreportings and sometimes intentional misreporting of harvest. But the overall programs that we have for the major fisheries in the BC interior, I would suggest that we have fairly reliable catch estimates under the current funding levels. There have been circumstances in the past where, because of reduced budgets, we've had a lot more uncertainty creep into the estimates that have been generated. But the current programs that are operated now in the interior of the major fisheries, the areas where the majority of the harvest occurs, are fairly good programs.
And how are the catches validated?
In the BC interior fisheries, the major ones, again, I'll speak to, they're the validation, and those are the ones where the majority of the validation goes on. We have departmental staff who collect information through boat-operated patrols on river, through sampling and talking to the fishermen. They have an opportunity to verify that catch from those fishers that they do speak to and take samples from, and can compare that to the information that the First Nations provide for the individual fisheries. They do provide it on an individual basis in some of these fisheries. So we do have that ability through our departmental staff to have validation. It's not something that we do on a daily basis, but we do periodically evaluate what the harvest information is that we are getting from individuals. They're very low. The terminal fisheries are fairly low harvest fisheries, and couple thousand pieces per year. Those types of fisheries, we very rarely will go and validate harvest, but we do make occasional visits.
Mr. Parslow, if you could add to that for the Lower Fraser, please.
Yeah, I think that similar to in the commercial fishery and in the fisheries in the BC interior, there is a reliance in some of the fisheries on fisher-reported data. So there's always the potential that that data could be biased one way or the other. But I think for our setnet fishery, we have a good program in place there. It's operated primarily by First Nations monitors, with DFO support on kind of data management and doing some spot checks as well. I think in that fishery, we have a fairly good estimate of the catch, and that's because we are accounting some proportion of that catch, and it's a survey-based program, so we are estimating for nets which aren't reported. In the drift net fisheries, it's a slightly different story. I still think the estimate is quite good, but we don't have a strong ability to expand to account for nets which are not accounted for in our survey program, or in our program. So in that case, we've got boats out there. We've got charter patrol vessels out, which are out there talking to fishermen, finding out who's out there. We have DFO vessels out, talking to fishermen, getting preliminary hails and finding out who is out there fishing. And I think that strengthens our estimate because it provides that validation of effort, so that when we get our data in from the First Nations groups, we can validate against that.
So DFO is independently, is that what you're saying, going to the river as well to have on the water presence and counting fish and validating catch?
we're doing some, I would say we aren't doing much validating of catch while we're on the water because we're mostly getting hails from the fishermen, but we are validating effort. So we're able to figure out which fishers might not have been spoken to at one of the landing sites and had a count performed there. Yeah.
The costs for Lower Fraser and BC Interior First Nations, FSC, and Economic Opportunity Fisheries Monitoring and Catch Reporting. If we could have the document at tab 27, please, of the Commission's list put on the screen. And it says here, this is response to Cohen Commission request 4C on catch monitoring. And if we look at note 1, it says these data reflect total Aboriginal Fisheries Strategy Agreement amounts. Perhaps, Mr. Jantz, if you could run us through a little bit about what the figures are telling us here.
Well, what we have here is the summaries by area, again, Lower Fraser, BC Interior, and South Coast. For the last 3 years, the total agreement amounts of dollars in AFS agreements, and associated with that is the amount that is specific to catch monitoring programs for the different areas. And then the third column is what the proportion or percentage of the dollars that are committed to catch monitoring are for the different areas. So in looking at 2010, you can see that 47% of the dollars in the BC Interior in the Lower Fraser, go to catch monitoring, 19% in the BC Interior, and 5% in the South Coast.
Now, for the BC Interior, Mr. Jantz, can you tell me how much of your catch monitoring program is relying on bee-based funding?
A considerable amount. There's a fairly long history of bee-based funding for the interior fisheries. Most recently, the dollars associated with bee-based funding sources is primarily through the pig feed program. And for FSC programs, we've received in the order of $200,000 annually. And on top of that, there's been some additional dollars with salary dollars for some staff. The majority of our recreational monitoring as well is covered through bee-based funding. So it's not just the FSC fisheries, but as well recreational monitoring in the interior is covered by bee-based dollars.
And we understand that pig fee is set to expire perhaps in March 2012. And if that does happen, yes, what will be the effect on the catch monitoring program in your area?
It will result again, as I mentioned earlier, in a significant increase in the uncertainty in the catch estimates that are derived primarily from the mid-river section of the Fraser River, which is where the majority of the harvest does occur in the BC Interior. In 2002 and 2003, I believe we were in a situation where we did not have bee-based funding as well. And the level of coverage is considerably reduced. We were not able to do our instantaneous overflight effort estimates, which tends to compromise your estimates of overall harvest if you haven't got those kinds of information. So it's a big concern to me.
Mr. Parcel, will there be any effects on the Lower Fraser area's catch monitoring program if pig fee expires and isn't replaced?
Yeah. Similar to Mr. Jantz, there will be a reduction in our coverage from DFO's perspective. I guess the only silver lining of how we're currently operating our program in the Lower Fraser is that our overflights are actually covered under an AFS agreement. So our overflights will still be maintained, assuming that AFS agreement amounts remain the same. But in terms of DFO support on those fisheries, we would have just our core staff and would have no seasonal technical support in order to go out and do surveys in the field and conduct the boat patrols. So, yeah.
So when you mention AFS agreements, you mean as shown in this figure here?
That's correct, in this figure, yeah.
Thank you. Could I have this figure marked as the next exhibit, please?
Exhibit 843.
And following up on that, if we could turn to the Commission's tab 24, please. And Mr. Parslow, could you speak to this document. It says it's a response to Cohen's request 2 on catch monitoring funding, and it's in particular for an AFS agreement through the Fraser Valley Aboriginal Fisheries Society. Is this one of the AFS agreements that you were just mentioning?
That's correct, yes. Do you want me to explain this?
Sure,
Okay.
please do.
So this is one of the main AFS agreements. It's the largest one in the Lower Fraser. And this is a group which is currently external from any First Nations group. And they provide monitoring services to 22 or 23 First Nations in the area between the Port Mann Bridge and Sawmill Creek. So it provides for First Nations monitors at a number of landing sites. It provides for overflights and provides for all of the administrative support for that program. So yes, that's what the program is. As you can see, it's had a number of names over the course of the last few years, but its program has been similar across all years.
Thank you. If I could have that marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 844.
Mr. Jansen, Mr. Proso, just to wrap up with the Fraser River First Nations FSC and Economic Opportunity Fisheries catch monitoring, could you speak to whether or not you feel the catch monitoring and reporting provides you with accurate and reliable estimates, and if you'd like to add to that any recommendations that you have for improving that process?
So I think on the whole it's a fairly reliable estimate, as I explained earlier. I think there are areas for improvement. Clearly the drift net fishery is one which I think could use some focus in order to firm up that estimate. I mean, the other piece would be providing some sort of independent validation of catch numbers. And I think those are the main things. And the other piece would be actually rebuilding the relationships with the groups which we're not receiving numbers from and addressing those concerns so that our data set is more complete, because that is a hole in our data set at the current time.
Thank you. Mr. Jantz?
And a similar response, in general, the major fisheries, we have fairly good coverage under the current funding level that we have. The concern I have is what is going to happen post-March 2012. There are opportunities for improving some of the catch estimates in the section of the Fraser River immediately above from what we call the mid-river area, so it's the upper Fraser. We have, in that particular area, we don't have full coverage of the fishery, and our current funding levels through AFS programs primarily in many years often do not cover the full duration of the fishery, so we are put in a position where we have to extrapolate catch for those periods when we don't have coverage. So that's one area that we could certainly improve our monitoring, and as well working with some groups that currently do not have AFS dollars. There are a number in the interior, primarily terminal harvesters, so their catch levels are not very large, but nevertheless they are not monitored. We do not have information for those fisheries. So working with those groups to try to get some funding and programs established there, whether they're just phone-in numbers or various different techniques for doing that, but that's one area that could be improved.
Thank you. And just one last line of questions, and I'll put this to you, Mr. Parslow. Do you have any systems in place to estimate illegal or unauthorized catch?
No, we don't. Not at the current time.
And do you obtain information from the Conservation and Protection branch in regards to illegally caught fish and the numbers of those?
It's something which we've been working on over the last 2 years, is to build a system for that information to be provided. So yes, it's something which is in development. Yeah.
Currently, those numbers don't go anywhere?
No, they aren't used in the management, no.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Next, we have Canada.
Mitchell Taylor for the participant Government of Canada. With me is Hugh McCauley. I have been allotted 50 minutes and asked to be shorter than that, Mr. Commissioner, so I'll start at 10 to the hour and aim to be shorter than 50 minutes and certainly not exceed it. Firstly, just a point of clarification, gentlemen on the panel. I think there is some evidence on this, but just to be clear, Mr. Parslow, Lower Fraser goes from Port Mann to Sawmill Creek, does it?
It actually extends a little bit farther. It goes from the mouth of the Fraser River, so some sections of Area 29, the commercial fishing area, up to Sawmill Creek. So.
All right.
Yeah.
And when we say Port Mann, though, we're talking about the Port Mann Bridge, aren't we?
That's correct. My apologies.
And Sawmill Creek, as I understand it, is above Hope on the Fraser Canyon, but I think below Boston Bar, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And Mr. Jantz, the BC Interior starts at Sawmill Creek, does it?
Yes, it does.
And do you go to the source of the Fraser and its various tributaries, or is some parts of the Fraser system go beyond BC Interior?
No, the Fraser drainage is within the BC Interior area. We also are responsible for the Upper Columbia drainage and some of the systems coming in from the north, but the entire Fraser is within the BC Interior above Sawmill.
All right, so you've got a very large area.
Very large, many groups.
Now, I want to ask about some aspects of fishery monitoring and catch reporting, and I think the easiest way to do this might be with reference to the document that's at tab 10 of Canada's binder of documents, which should be in front of you, and it is also Exhibit 429. Do each of you recognize that document?
Yes.
All right.
Yes?
Yep.
Now, this is the latest version of what's called a draft discussion paper entitled Strategic Framework, isn't it?
Yes, I believe so. There may be a more recent version of this with some minor modifications, but in essence, I believe this is the...
All right. And I think an earlier version of this, and I don't need to take you to it, is referenced in paragraph 112 of the PPR that's now Exhibit PPR number 12. Who of you would care to explain very briefly what is this document and what does it do?
I could do that. This document it's a consultation document or discussion document that the department has developed over a number of years, which we are now in the process of taking out for consultation with the various users of the resource and First Nations, in trying to establish exactly what it says, a strategic framework for fishery monitoring into the future for Pacific fisheries. So this is it's identifying objectives and different levels of monitoring for different levels, different kinds of fisheries, and so on and so forth.
All right. And is there a process and timeline to finalize this document?
There is, and I believe the panel tomorrow probably could provide more of the specifics on that, because they have changed somewhat over the time period. But my current understanding is we're trying to develop a final document to be implemented in the 2012 season.
All right. And when do you consider that to start then? The summer of 2012?
For salmon fisheries, it would be the summer of 2012.
On page 3, there's a box in the lower right corner which is headed up, "What is fishery monitoring and catch reporting?" I'll leave it to the panel to decide who best to answer, and maybe more than one of you want to answer. But does that reflect the department's working definition of fishery monitoring and catch reporting?
I think it does reflect the department's
All right.
definitions.
And at the area level, Mr. Jantz and Mr. Parslow, is that a working definition that you and your staff use in your everyday work?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, this is a consultation document you've described. With reference not just to that document, but the work you do, and I'll ask Mr. Jantz and Mr. Parslow, how important is consultation and transparency in fishery monitoring and catch reporting?
In the fisheries that I deal with, it is very important. Groups are continually pointing fingers at other fishers, other sectors for the level of monitoring that goes on in their fisheries. We hear it on a regular basis, so having some consistency and transparency in how catch monitoring programs are delivered is very important.
And how do you go about, well, firstly, before I go there, Mr. Parslow, do you want to add on that?
Yeah, I would just echo Mr. Jan's comments, actually. In our area, there's the same sort of concerns around monitoring programs operated by other groups, and the transparency and consistency addresses that concern.
Then for each of the Lower Fraser and the BC Interior, how do you go about achieving what you've just described?
We do this primarily through meetings and workshops that we've had with the various sectors and groups, but this process that we're currently going through, this consultation process to try to figure out catch monitoring into the future is very key to establishing the criteria around managing different kinds of fisheries. So it's something that we're in the developmental stages of at the current time, but generally we do provide to the groups, upon request, descriptions of the various catch monitoring programs that we do have for the different fisheries.
Mr. Parslow, do you have anything to add for the Lower Fraser?
Yeah, there's one additional point in the Lower Fraser is there's been a group working on the recreational and First Nations relationship building. This is a group which we've worked with to build understanding around the monitoring programs in each of those fisheries. So we've conducted sessions where we review each of the programs with both of those groups in the room and responded to questions and provided additional detail on the program where needed. So.
All right. Dr. Houtman, do you have anything to add to any of this? Now, at a couple of points in this document, page 6 and page 20 are two places where it occurs. There's reference to risk-based strategic framework. Do any of the panel members have anything to say what is meant in this context by risk-based? What is being referred to?
I believe it refers to sort of the ecological risk of a fishery. If a fishery has a large has the ability to catch a large amount of fish, or is occurring in an area where there's a sensitive stock, there's ecological risks associated with that. So those are major drivers for the requirements for the level of catch estimation quality that would be needed.
There's a description at pages 4 and 5 of this document of the status of monitoring and reporting, and I don't need to take you to the details of that. It's there for people to read. But it seems to suggest, as I read it, that there has been over time an evolution in fishery monitoring and catch reporting, and we are seeing more and more of monitoring and reporting. Is that a fair assessment?
I believe that's a fair assessment.
And why is it that there's more and more monitoring and reporting happening and being encouraged and in some cases required?
I think as time has gone on, there's been a situation where we've encountered more and more frequently stocks of what I would call stocks of concern. So these are individual stocks that are not performing well in relation to the overall salmon population, and subsequently management actions have needed to be taken to try to protect those stocks. And without very accurate catch information, it can be difficult to determine what the impact of a particular fishery may have on these individual stocks. So over time, going back 50 to 100 years ago, the level of production of salmon in the Pacific region was considerably larger than it is currently, and the level of monitoring that was required was not as significant as it is today. Fishery duration was considerably longer in many areas. Commercial fisheries were often open 7 days a week. or 4 days a week. We're down to, in some areas, hours of being open. So there's been a reduction in overall production of salmon, but in particular, certain stocks of concern are driving the importance of getting improved information to assist in making more improved management decisions for individual fisheries. So I think that's kind of been the trend that's resulted in the increased level of monitoring that's required for a number of fisheries.
Is it the case that we have now and going forward more groups of fishers than we did decades ago?
Yes, that's the other complicating factor. There's higher interest from a number of different sectors, for lack of a better term. So the recreational community is interested in harvesting more and more fish. The commercial sector obviously has great interest in harvesting more and more fish, and First Nations obviously have an interest in harvesting fish. So the increase in demand is also complicated that, and as well having allocation decisions where each different sector has a specific amount. The department needs to try to demonstrate that we're managing the fisheries to stay within those amounts.
And in all of that, is it the case with more fishers that there tends to be some finger pointing and questioning or mistrust amongst the fishing groups?
I think that's a fair statement.
And that leads us back to the need for transparency and good reporting then, does it?
Yes.
Now, at pages 11 and 12 of this document, and you can look at that for reference in answering this question if you want, but I'm interested in the challenges that you face in terms of both getting information, and you've described some of that, but the challenges you face and how you overcome those challenges, and related to that, the challenges associated with overcoming the questioning or mistrust from group to group and mistrust of DFO and its estimates.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
All right.
Are these the kinds of challenges?
What challenges do you have and how do you overcome them?
I think this is a fairly good description of the challenges. How we overcome them is by working with the groups to try to get concurrence on different ways of approaching whichever the issue or the challenge is. But again, the department tries to do this through open and transparent discussions with all of the groups to ensure that we build the best approach for dealing with it, whatever the challenge is.
All right. Now, Mr. Jans, I think most of the fisheries in your area would be First Nation with some recreational, perhaps. Is that right?
Yes, we have First Nation FSC fisheries. We are now developing commercial opportunities as well, and recreational fisheries.
And Mr. Parslow, in your area, you have all three, really. You've got the First Nations, some recreational and commercial, do you?
That's correct, yeah.
And do you have processes where you bring those three groups together or representatives of them, and what sort of processes and what's the outcome?
Not at the area level at the current time. We don't have processes to discuss monitoring with all the main three groups fishing on those stocks.
It's done at the regional level then, is it?
I think it is, yes. Yeah.
Are you involved in that at all, Dr. Houtman?
Sorry, ask it again.
Are you involved in processes that bring together the various fisher groups?
No.
All right, that's probably for tomorrow's panel. You've given evidence as to the level of confidence in the estimates you achieve in answer to Ms. Chan's questions, and you've spoken to your respective areas, and I think at least one of you mentioned this, but I want to be clear. The fish monitoring and catch reporting that each of you are working on and doing is fish monitoring and catch reporting of legal or open fisheries. Is that right?
That's right.
That's true with you, Mr. Jansen, Mr. Parslow?
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct.
And more specifically, then, you're not dealing with any monitoring or reporting of illegal or out of time fishing?
We currently don't have programs to monitor the fisheries, the illegal fisheries or unauthorized fisheries that are occurring during closed times. We do, however, receive some catch information or seized fish information from enforcement officers who may have encountered fishers during a closed period. So we do have some information, but it's not a complete survey of the fishery that might be occurring during a closed time period.
All right, we'll come to some of that, I think, in a few minutes. Now, you're aware, are you, that conservation and protection do work in terms of investigation and patrols and so forth, and that they find certain fishing being done out of open time or in closed times? Is that correct? And that's the kind of information that you say in a sort of snapshot or sporadic or irregular way comes to you from CMP, does it?
Yes.
And do you take account of that information in your catch estimates?
For in-season management purposes, we do not. We often do not get that information till the end of the year, when Conservation and Protection provide a report, if they actually generate one. Sometimes it's just some data sheets that they will turn into us at the end of the year. So it's not involved in the in-season management decisions for at least in the BC Interior area, and I'm not sure, I don't believe it is included in other areas, but I'm not certain.
All right. Do you get any information from CMP, this will be for Mr. Parslow or Mr. Jantz, or both rather, do you get any information from CMP about fish catch in open or lawful fishing times to supplement the information you're getting through your own work?
In the BC Interior, we do not, largely because the FSC fisheries that are ongoing are generally 7-day-a-week fisheries. They're a very slow-paced fishery. So the information that is collected during those fisheries is done entirely by our catch monitoring program.
Mr. Parslow?
Yeah, we don't receive like your typical catch information that we would use in our estimates. We do get some kind of anecdotal information on encounters of bycatch species if that's an issue of concern during a certain fishery. They will provide that sort of information and information on mesh compliance. But.
All right. And within DFO, as I understand it, the work that the three of you do and colleagues that work with you, that's the part of fisheries that does the systematic fishery monitoring catch report estimating, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And CMP provides some information, but their information is as they come across it. Is that fair to say?
Yes, their major role is enforcement of the regulations around a particular fishery, and they do periodically provide some information in relation to catches that occur outside of open times, but they are generally consumed with enforcement, so that they often do not have the kind of information that is required in order to make an estimate, so it's right. Anecdotal in some respects.
You get some information from CMP, and I understand that both Mr. Jantz and Mr. Parslow, for your respective areas, you have a template or a data sheet that CMP people can put information on and then feed it into, do you?
Yes, it's a data sheet that's been developed over the last 5 to 10 years in the BC Interior and Lower Rivers.
All right.
Yeah, I've got a slightly different situation where there's we've got two data sheets, one which was developed in 2005 and 2006, primarily targeted at illegal activity during closed times. And then more recently, I've been working with CNP to develop a data sheet to collect both illegal activity and activity occurring during openings. So trying to get additional information from it.
All right. I wonder if Mr. Lund could bring up what are called the templates. And there's a number of them. We'll see which one, well, there's 4 in total. We'll see which one comes up first. These are documents that, Mr. Commissioner, I gave out this morning, so they're new documents. They don't have any content to it. They appear to be upside down. They have no content to them. They're just templates, and that's the only purpose in having them here. This looks like, is this your sheet, Mr. Jens?
Yes, it is.
And your sheet, I believe, has 2 pages to it.
I believe so, yes.
And that's the first page, and I don't know if it's possible to get the second page on the screen at the same time or not. While we're waiting, Mr. Rosenblum was pleased to see that there was a new screensaver come up this morning, but I see we're back to the old one again. We're not able to have either of them up right now then?
I can pull up one.
Okay, let's do it one at a time. All right. And are you able, Mr. Lund, to bring up the second template that comes from the BC Interior, which is something that has First Nation effort count on the top? We're getting not all, but most of the sheet. Is it possible to make this a bit smaller, which makes the prints, there we have the whole thing. So that's your sheet, Mr. Jens?
Well, this is one side of
Okay.
one page of the sheet that we provide to CMP to collect
All right.
information as they're on the river.
And then, Mr. Lund, you had it a moment ago, but the other side of the sheet has interview and observation at the top. There we go. And that's the other side, is it?
Yes, it is.
All right. And that's used by CMP officers in BC Interior to provide information to you and your colleagues.
When they're out on enforcement patrols during closed time periods and they encounter a net in the river, we
All right.
ask them to provide these pieces of information.
Could this front and back then be exhibit, the next exhibit, please?
Exhibit 845.
Thank you. Then going to the Lower Fraser, and Mr. Lund, you had that one a moment ago. There's 3 pages in total, 2 of which have observed illegal fishing log at the top, and the other says Lower Fraser Conservation and Protection Patrol log. So we've got 2 of the 3 there. There's another sheet that would have, it'd be similar to the one that's mainly on the screen. Well, let's go at it this way. We should have the complete set, I guess. While Mr. Lund is looking, Mr. Parslow, do you recognize both the document mainly on the screen and the one that you can only see a little bit of behind it?
Yes, I do.
And are those 2 of 3 pages of the template that you use in the Lower Fraser for having CMP provide information?
Yes, the one which is mainly showing on the screen, at the bottom of the screen, in addition to the 3rd page, are the ones that were used previously in 2005 and 2006.
Okay.
And then the other document is the one which has recently been developed.
So the one that's recently developed is the one entitled Lower Fraser Area CMP Patrol Log?
That's correct.
All right. Mr. Lund, you don't have the one that says sandheads in the left upper corner? All right, so observed illegal fishing log sandheads to Steveston, and observed illegal fishing log Port Mann to Mission, and the currently developed form Lower Fraser Area Conservation and Protection Patrol log. 3 sheets, I would ask, be the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 846.
This is a question for each member of the panel, and I'll leave it to you to decide who goes first. Is there a linkage between, and does fish monitoring and catch reporting advance the objectives of the wild salmon policy?
Yes, I believe it does.
You can swing your mic over if you...
Yes, I do believe it does.
In what way?
Well, I think in that it is, again, goes back to what we were discussing previously. It allows the department to have a much improved assessment of the numbers of fish returning, harvested, escaped, fisheries. So this is one component, one piece of the information that allows us to determine what the status of individual CUs may be, the conservation units within the wild salmon policy.
All right. Mr. Parslow, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Dr. Houtman?
No, I agree.
All right. Now, if we might turn to Canada's documents, tab 4. This is a document charting our course, April of 2011. I understand that the panel members are not particularly familiar with this document. Are you familiar with the concept or construct of the Monitoring and Compliance Panel?
Yes, I am.
And we'll have some evidence on this tomorrow, I think, too. But very briefly, Mr. Jantz, what is that panel?
It's a panel or a committee that was established within the ISDF, so the Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum, to deal specifically with having discussions around fishery monitoring, primarily salmon fishery monitoring. In the Fraser River is where it started, but this is a broader context, and it has very similar objectives and ideals that we currently are going out and consulting on within the department's overall framework for catch monitoring. So very similar. But this is a process that has involvement from membership from all sectors in the Pacific region. So there's commercial, recreational, and First Nation representatives. I'm not certain whether there's environmentalists involved in this process or not, but it's one that the department and other funding sources have provided dollars to try to deal with developing a coordinated approach to catch monitoring.
And is that something that Colin Masson is deeply involved with?
Yes, I believe.
And we'll hear some more from him tomorrow, I think. And and I'm going to apologize for the pronunciation, and you can see it in the forward here. Is Peter Sakic the chair of this particular panel, to your knowledge?
I believe he is. Yes.
Okay, and he'll be here tomorrow as well. Does this monitoring and compliance panel process touch on the work that you do in your areas, Mr. Jansen, Mr. Parslow?
I'm not sure what you mean by touch on, but it's, as I said, it's been working. It's identified that catch monitoring and the trust between sectors for catch monitoring programs for other sectors is an issue in the Pacific region. The finger pointing we discussed earlier.
So it relates but doesn't impact what you're doing as yet?
Well, it's working towards development of a strategy to move forward to improve catch monitoring programs, develop consistent, transparent kinds of programs for the different fisheries in the Pacific region. So the same kind of objectives that we have in the framework that is being developed within the federal government for catch monitoring.
Now, at tab 2, there is a document. I won't mark tab 4 today. I don't think we'll come back to it tomorrow, and I'm sure will be marked as an exhibit. At tab 2, and I won't mark this either, you'll see a deck, and as I understand, the panel members do not have involvement in this directly. Is that right?
That's correct.
Not in building it, no.
Yeah.
Now, at page 3, well, throughout, there's reference to strategic framework for fisheries monitoring and catch reporting. What's meant by strategic framework, as you understand it? What's that all about?
Well, again, this is the directive that the department is working towards, trying to develop the appropriate level of catch monitoring programs for all fisheries in the Pacific region. And it goes through a ranking type process for the level of impact a fishery may have on a particular stock of concern or salmon in general. So there's a number of different things involved in this process, but it's trying to develop the framework for future catch monitoring programs in the Pacific region.
All right. Ms. Chen took you to tab 25 of the commission binder, which is now Exhibit 841. And that's a chart that's got figures on it for expenditures for catch monitoring by area. There seems to be in the operations and maintenance quite a difference between the different areas in terms of the amount spent. And if you look at that for the Central Coast and BC Interior, for most years, it would appear to be, for each of those two areas, a larger number by a considerable margin than for the Lower Fraser. Mr. Jansen, Mr. Parslow, particularly Mr. Parslow, is there a reason why for the Lower Fraser either you're able to do so much with so less, or you're not doing as much, or what? Is there an explanation for that?
Yes, I think the main reason for this is what I was discussing earlier, where we're covering off a large proportion of our monitoring program under our AFS funding. So I think one of the discrepancies there, if you pull up the AFS information as well, is that Lower Fraser actually has a higher AFS proportion dedicated to catch monitoring. And I expect that's where the discrepancy is, where we're covering off overflights, which are quite expensive, and some of our technician time through AFS dollars, rather than salary and wage and O&M.
All right, so the work is being done and money being spent, as you would see in the chart we're looking at, for other areas, but you're simply funding it through other means, is what you're saying.
That's correct, yeah.
All right.
And actually, just one further point, there's a note at the bottom indicating that salary expenditures for the Lower Fraser River, that's point 4, are incomplete for 2001 to 2004, 2005. This was just, we didn't have the corporate knowledge in our office on the time period in order to pull all that information together. So this will be an underestimate of our salary and wage costs for those years, quite possibly. So.
Going forward in time, and this will be a question for each of you, what, for your respective area and or coverage of work that you do, what's the one or two or three or few most important things that you consider need to be ensured continue or be done, if they're not already being done, to make for good fishery monitoring and catch reporting? We'll start with you, Mr. Parslow.
So you're looking for, one or a few items which need to be continued or improved upon?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Or started if they're not
started.
already being done.
Yeah. I think that the ongoing kind of relationship building with groups for which we are having issues right now needs to be continued, definitely, on the First Nations side of things. I think the existing programs are quite good in a lot of ways and should remain as is, if not be built upon. I think the areas that could see improvement, as I mentioned earlier, are providing potentially some sort of independent validation and increasing our drift net, the reliability of our drift net estimate. Yeah.
How would you go about independent validation?
I'm not sure if I could design a program on the spot here, but
what kind of things are you thinking that would go into independent validation?
It could be just additional support from, in the past, CNP has been doing some work conducting validation of landings and things like that. It could be additional overflights to validate like effort profiles and things like that. So additional coverage is probably what I would suggest.
All right. Mr. Jantz?
As far as some of the things I would like to see continue, in the BC Interior, I think the level of monitoring that we have in the mid-river portion of the interior is appropriate for the kind of fishing that and the level of fishing that goes on there. A lot of the future is going to be, I think, determined by the strategic framework that we were just talking about a little while ago, which will identify the level of risk, or for lack of a better term, associated with each of the different fisheries and so on. So it helps to identify whether you need low coverage, medium coverage, or enhanced coverage for a particular fishery. So when we get to that point that we have agreed upon metrics to apply to different fisheries, it'll put us in a better position to identify the level of monitoring you currently have and whether it's adequate to meet the standards that are established. But that being said, there are areas that I mentioned previously that we do need to see some improvement in. In the Upper Fraser, we don't have complete coverage of the fisheries there, so certainly that's something that we need to work with First Nations to improve upon. But probably the key thing in the interior, the BC Interior, is to get the funding for these programs that the department currently does, either A-based, so we have annual allotments of dollars to conduct those fisheries, so we aren't relying on programs such as PICFI or the Williams Inquiry to supplement our programs, or an increase in the AFS programs and take a similar approach to what's being done in the Lower River. But we need security on the resources in order to maintain the kind of programs that we have.
All right. I take it that in the BC Interior, the AFS agreement amounts are in the aggregate less than for the Lower Fraser, are they?
The numbers, or the amounts of dollars directed to catch monitoring, are lower. The overall AFS funding is a higher level, I believe, than in the Lower Fraser or similar to. But within the BC Interior, the AFS funding, or a significant amount of AFS funding, goes towards stock assessment programs as well as habitat monitoring programs. So lesser amounts are committed to catch monitoring programs.
I see. Is that a result of different choices made in the two areas? Is that why you end up with more money going to this than that in the BC Interior, and differently so in the Lower Fraser?
Yes, I believe so. I wasn't around during the time of the negotiation of the regional AFS agreements in the BC Interior, but there is an increased importance in habitat work, as well as stock assessment work in the BC Interior. First Nations do have a desire to do a lot of that, so I think that's why that.
You've mentioned Middle Fraser and Upper Fraser, and there may be other.
If we could, I thought you were going to be finished by now. Could we take the break at this point?
Yes, I will be finished within 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Hearing we'll now recess for 15 minutes.